Hello, and welcome to this episode of the K&Co Tech Pod. I'm your host, Shely Kramer, Principal Analyst here at Kramer&Co. I'm joined today by my friend and fellow analyst, Zeus Kerravala, Principal Analyst at ZK Research. Hello, Zeus.
Hey, Shely, how you been?
Great. All
It's been
things
days since I've
considered.
seen you.
What's that?
It's been days since I've seen you. We haven't had an event like in a week now. So
I know. Well, today we're going to talk all things Cisco Collab and some updates that are coming from the Cisco team and the momentum the company reports experience and really our thoughts on what's ahead. So to kind of set the foundation here, the focus of the Webex team has been tuned on three pillars or aspects of the business. And these are reimagining customer experience, which is contact center and CPAAs, reimagining workplaces, which is devices, and reimagining work, which is the Webex Suite. The company shared some impressive results in a recent update in each of those areas. Let's start first by talking about contact centers. Yes.
yeah, well, they were certainly all in on contact center last year, right? In fact, I think they've pivoted a lot of their focus to leading with that, and I understand why. When I think their other two pillars they have are still, reimagining workspaces. Are employees going back to work? Are they not? Right? I think companies need to determine that before they go forward and deploy some of the Cisco technology. On the competitive UC side, obviously it's a very tough market, but call center, I think, or contact center, I think is it's going through a pretty big transition now, and I'm a firm believer that share shift happens when markets transition, and the contact center is going through the biggest transition with AI it's had in a long time. So it creates a pretty big competitive opportunity for Cisco, and they've loaded Webex Contact Center up with a lot of AI features, and I think They can go toe-to-toe with anybody now as far as features and functions go, and now it's about getting more swings at the at-bat. I know at Webex One, they announced several large customers, and I think that's one of the interesting things about Cisco is they do big very well, right? Like sometimes they do struggle small market, mid-market, but the one thing they've always done is big enterprise. And so we did see quite a bit of momentum there, and I think they mentioned that Webex Contact Center I think it's their fastest growing product inside Cisco now. So it's good to hear about there.
Yeah, and they shared that they're closing larger CCAAs and UCAS deals up market. And so that the cloud contact center business is growing. And a lot of this is that, digital evolution tends to be a key customer concern and objective. And this is kind of the path to helping with that journey, I think.
Yeah. And I think one of the good things they've done too is by having it be delivered off that single Webex cloud, they can address a lot of use cases for non-traditional agents as well, right? So if you think about the traditional agent works in the contact center dashboard, there's a bunch of workers, salespeople, field service folks like that tend to use contact center, but they don't live in contact center, right? They use it as part of their job. And I think Cisco's done a nice job of pivoting the product and addressing those. In fact, at Webex One of the sessions I did was, Webex Contact Center for non-contact center employees. And we talked a lot about that trend of the TAM getting bigger because there's more and more non-agents using contact center seats. And Cisco is in a good position to address that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things, I think, that when we have an opportunity to dive deep into what that customer base looks like, your comment made earlier, and that they do big really well is very spot on. I mean, some of the biggest brands across the world are relying on this solution, and it's really pretty impressive. And yet I think it's something that in everyday conversation around contact center, a lot of times we're not thinking about Cisco as a leader in that space. And I think that's really that's the challenge here that I see.
Yeah.
This isn't a capabilities. It's not a capabilities situation. It's a share of voice situation. It's a marketing problem they have to solve for, and a comms problem.
Yeah, well, Webex is it's a interesting double-edged sword, right? It's very well branded, but it's known as a meetings product.
Yeah.
And so trying to make that pivot more to contact center is, certainly poses some challenge trying to rebrand something. And they were in the CCAS MQ this year, so it'll be really interesting to see if they can make that shift into the leader quadrant this year, because that would certainly validate from a Gartner perspective, right? At least, some of the activities they've been doing. But I think that's when you look at where the focus of Webex is going to be going into 2025, I think contact center is going to still be the continue to be the primary area of focus, because the TAM is so big. Because if you look at the ARPU, right, the revenue you get off one seat of contact center dwarfs what you're going to get on Webex, and so for all those reasons, I think it makes sense for them to double down on that, and I think you'll see that. In fact, even I expect the Webex One keynote to be largely contact center based as well. So.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's talk devices. I know, Cisco has also shared with us that they have experienced impressive growth in new customers quarter over quarter, and they're winning facilities with the whole smart workplace story. And we've seen some of those devices, and, how their sustainability story is part of that makes it attractive and everything else. So what are your thoughts on the device front, the workspaces front?
I think the best thing they did with the devices is they made them multi-vendor.
Yeah.
Right. So
absolutely.
you can run Teams meeting rooms, Zoom rooms, Google rooms, all on the same devices that you run your Webex rooms on them. And they put a lot of work into that too, because while there are other devices that will support multiple vendors, you got to do a reboot between them. You don't with the Webex devices. And if you talk to folks at some of the companies they support, I even asked somebody this at Microsoft. They said they make the best devices. They're a little expensive, right? They are premium priced devices, but they are loaded with features. And I think this, to me, when you talk to the channel partners, like I remember talking to Joe Berger at Worldwide Technology about this, that now that Cisco's willing to give them devices to seed into customers, like give them a handful of devices for free, that tends to convert to a lot of the deals in the back end. And I think for Cisco, being able to penetrate a Teams environment or a Zoom's environment through the device creates a great opportunity for them to land, and then it's up to the salesperson to expand. But they made the device much more than the device, right? I think last year they integrated Thousand Eyes observability into it, and that creates a lot of really good data with which to be able to understand user experience. Also, I think Control Hub is the best of the UC dashboards out there. In fact, I think Control Hub is something they should talk more about. I think it goes part and parcel with the devices, but there's no question if there's something Cisco knows how to build. That group led by Sonora Jesbu, they know how to build devices. They've always built best in class devices, and they continue to. And so, for me, that's the right way for them to enter that market of being able to rebuild the workforce. I still think the big challenge though is just the return to office is messy for so many companies. And I don't think many companies really know what they want to do there, and so ask them to spend monies to rebuild conference rooms ahead of understanding what their plans are is a big ask. I think as hopefully in 2025 we'll see some settling down of return to office and get back to something that doesn't lead to massive people quitting organizations and things.
Yeah, on that front, something that I happened across, really, I was reading the news this morning that I thought was interesting. Amazon is, famously done this return to office mandate and that sort of thing. And, people all over the country are scrambling, trying to figure things out. But Amazon isn't even ready in many instances with offices for those people to return to. So I do think there's an opportunity there, in instances like with AWS, where they do need to not only secure space, but outfit space and everything else. But I thought that was amusing that, we're going to put the hammer down and require everybody to return to office, but we don't have any place for you to go quite yet.
Yeah, I've seen that from other companies as well. Broadcom mandated that for VMware employees, and they a couple of the employees I talked to, they're the only person in the department that goes to that local office, and so they just wind up sitting on meetings all day, virtual meetings all day. And so I think until you've got that strategy built, I understand the whole make the office a magnet, not a mandate, and they've Cisco's got their showcases in Paris and Chicago, Atlanta, New York. But if their customer is not ready, they're not going to spend ahead of that. The other challenge too, Shely, is companies that have rebuilt their workspaces, culturally, they weren't really ready to take advantage of the workspace. Like, you have to be of the mindset that you want to go into a conference room and use a lot of the features in the boards. And this is something that's not Cisco specific. I wonder about this for the entire industry. We've seen great innovations, like Cisco's got that, cinematic mode. You can use multiple monitors now. They came up with a new ceiling mic, things like that. But if companies, pre-pandemic, the way we sat in conference rooms, we all just sat around a table and we
Right.
talked. Might have had one video display on. So expecting them culturally to understand how to take care of technology that's moved ahead 4 years since then
Right.
is hard, right? And so I think this is where Cisco needs to rely on their channel partners to help educate customers a little bit more on what that new world of work looks like.
Yeah.
So if you are going to rebuild your workplace, this is the best way to optimize it. And so
Right.
I expect that to still, be a business for Cisco where you see a lot of peaks and valleys.
Yeah.
I still think they'll do a good job of penetrating, primarily Teams environments and be able to grow from there. But if they want to see an escalation of that business, right, there needs to be a lot of education from their channel to
Yeah.
their customers.
Well, and that's why it was great news to see coming out of Partner Summit, sort of, a revamping of the partner program and better incentives for partners and that sort of thing. I mean, this is where the revenue comes from. So I think that was a necessary move, and this is going to be play an important part here moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last part of these pillars, then we've touched on contact center. We've touched on, which is reimagining customer experience, reimagining workspaces, which is devices, and reimagining work, which is, of course, Webex Suite deals and that sort of thing. And we know, based on the information that Cisco has shared with us, that, calling is driving Webex Suite deals. And it's one of those things, I think Cisco is really good about landing and expanding as a strategy. And, they get customers involved in calling. And then, the beauty of Webex Suite, and I will tell you that of all of the collaboration platforms out there, my favorite by far remains Webex Suite, and I have worked inside of it for many, many years. I love the functionality. The team keeps working to, infuse every part of it with AI and everything else. So I'm an unabashed fan of Webex Suite. And I think what's happening is that we're seeing, calling opens the door to awareness of Webex Suite. And then once people start using Webex Suite, they're like, oh my gosh, this has so much functionality built in. And we're also seeing the migration of on-prem calling, Cisco and Avaya customers at scale. And I think another key thing that Cisco is experiencing is that, competitively held customers are starting to look at the costs that are involved, and they're starting to say, wait a minute, let's talk about, let's look at some alternatives. And that's, I think, where Webex has an opportunity to shine.
Yeah, the suite's interesting because it's certainly, of all the ones out there, it's the one that's the most tried and true, right? I mean, they've had this suite for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think what holds them back is a lot of the perceptions of the suite, the pre-pandemic version of the suite, which really wasn't all that good. And it's been retooled. I still think they could do a better job at a product level in helping customers understand the differences. Because if you just look at it from a checkbox perspective, everyone's got meetings, everyone's got AI, everyone's got noise removal. But, they do have some pretty interesting differentiators, like with their background noise removal. They're the only one that does like optimize for my voice. And so if you were to use their product in a Starbucks where there's a lot of voices, right, you're going to pick up, if you're going to use Webex and optimize for my voice, that'll be clear because it'll only pick up your voice. If you use one of the competitive products, you're going to get a lot of background noise because it's optimized for all voices. Also, you and I spent some time together right down at Kennedy Space Center, where they showed the Webex being used on Orion, right? And then just after that, they actually released a new codec that works in low. It's a little bit different, but that works in low bandwidth environments, right? That's a lot of really interesting innovation that they know how to do because they're a network vendor, and they've built a lot of that optimization capabilities and observability capabilities into the suite that does give Webex a big quality advantage. I just don't think they've really talked about that much because they've done a lot of competing, from on a features function standpoint. What's going to be interesting is, given their size and the amount of investment they can make compared to most of their peers, they should be able to get a leg up on the AI side too, right?
Correct.
Right. And so we'll see in 2025 if a lot of the things they've been doing actually create a big enough differentiator that people are willing to consolidate more of the functionality, into Webex. And your point on calling is interesting too, because this is something that you read all the time, like the phone's dead, calling's dead. But I mean, from what I can see, calling's alive and well. There's a lot of industries, retail and healthcare and things like that, that still rely heavily on phones. And they make good phones. They've always had good quality, and that's something that continues to work well for them. So it's long from being dead, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think, what the team at Webex indicated is that customers are adding additional seats in the suite throughout the year. They're converting customers from meetings only or callings only to the suite as a whole. They're seeing that the increase in cloud calling products, and they're also, I thought this was kind of cool. And again, this is to your earlier point that Cisco does big really well. They're seeing some impressive customer growth, and the customers spending over $1 million with them. So, and really they attribute a lot of that cloud calling growth driving interest in the suite and likely causing this momentum. So, and to your point again, the integrations, the interoperability across software and hardware and third-party AI partners, like all of that is playing a role here, I think, in the attractiveness features that Webex brings to the table.
I'll be curious to see next year too, as AI becomes a bigger part of the strategy for customers, if they are willing to consolidate down products, because it's very common to have Cisco for calling, Zoom for video, Teams for chat, right? I mean, that's not an uncommon combination to see. In fact, I've seen a lot of data that says customers use somewhere in between 3 and 5 meeting platforms, which to me seems crazy, but that's what they do.
Right.
And so if AI is the way forward, and if data is the thing that makes AI run, then you would think you'd want to consolidate those down. And Cisco's got a pretty good story there. The other really kind of interesting thing to watch next year for Webex is with Jeetu Patel now having become the chief product officer, right? Which they haven't had ever, which to me is unfathomable to understand. What kind of integration they're able to do between Webex and security and Webex and networking, Webex and Splunk, things like that, to create like a 1 + 1 = 3. Like when I was a reseller, people bought a lot of Cisco VoIP on a Cisco network because they just inherently believe that Cisco and Cisco work better. Somewhere in the last 20 years, that magic disappeared. G2 talks a lot about creating magical experiences and platform strategy. And so to me, I think part of the, we get these analyst updates every month. What I'm looking for next year is to see a lot of that platform innovation coming through, right? And so they're doing this in the network, which makes Webex quality better. They're doing this with security, which makes the Webex suite more secure. And I know obviously G2 pretty well, and he's very, very focused on that. But if they can do that, then all of a sudden this big, huge base they have of network customers becomes a good. The expand, it becomes the Webex suite on top of the already landed network. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't touched on security, but let's do that. I think it's to me, I have always regarded Webex and Cisco as, best in class security. And I think it's good to see Webex leaning into security across the portfolio as a whole. And this is, to me, where a significant part of the company's appeal comes in. And that reputation of best in class security, even before Cisco's Splunk acquisition, I think is a key differentiator. So what about Splunk? Is there a Splunk Webex story?
Yeah, that one's not obvious. By the way, the security angle in the communication space has been an interesting one. Obviously, I've been part of the Enterprise Connect team for a long time at the
Yeah.
shows, and we've tried to run security tracks there over the years, and they've never done all that well. And part of it is the communications buyer doesn't really understand security. Now, every once in a while, something happens, like during the pandemic when Zoom bombing was happening and things. It
Yeah.
drives all this focus to security, and then it goes away, and then we see it again, right, and then it goes away. And I think um, um, the marketing and security for communications has always been challenging because they are different buyers, right? But I do think now, again, with AI becoming such a big focus, securing the data becomes more important, understanding
Yes.
what people are doing with these products, right? So I think there's another chance there. Now on the Splunk side, um, that one's not as obvious where that is. I mean, there's some obvious points of data where you could take observability data, from the Webex devices, and even within the client, they collect a lot of information, feed that into Splunk and do some analytics. But that's been a question in my mind: is what is the Webex plus Splunk story, and is it meaningful enough to be able to drive Webex into Splunk environments and Splunk into Webex environments? And
Right.
they haven't really come out with what that story is, but that again is something that I'm waiting to see in 2025. Now, if you look at the way Cisco's approached Splunk, right, it was create the observability integration first, which is the most obvious, then security, which is also very obvious. They're talking more about what they can do on the network side, and given the size of the network base, that makes sense. And so it seems like it's a progression there, with Webex on the tail end of that. But
Right.
I do think there is some advantage there from a user experience standpoint, even being able to do analytics to understand user behavior. But it's not something that they've talked about broadly. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we wrap this show, is there anything we haven't touched on that you want to hit on?
I just think that one of the areas that I'd like to see from them, and also the industry at large, is the UC plus CC story,
Mhm.
right? Shely, you and I have been around this industry a long time. We hear about that all the time. But
Mhm.
if you look at who's driving contact center sales still, it's all the pure plays. It's, Five9, Talkdesk, NICE, Genesys, Avaya, right? None of them really have a great UC story, or at least an integrated UC story. And so
Right.
if there is so much value in UC plus CC, why
Yeah.
haven't heard it? Why hasn't one of these UC vendors, Zoom, Ring Central, Webex, gotten 8x8, gotten disproportionate share, right? And that
Right.
hasn't happened yet. And so I think it's incumbent upon Cisco and the industry to show us what those are. And until then, it's going to remain a market of silos. Now, granted, the industry analyst community doesn't help them, because our waves and MQs and IDC marketscapes are all siloed, right? And
Yeah.
so it's not like you get a better score in the CCAS MQ because you have a good UC story. And so
Right.
I do think the analyst community needs to catch up a little bit there. But that is something I've been waiting to see. Also, I think in the large enterprise space, most of those customers still largely run on-prem systems, and so there's not many companies that can deliver a true hybrid solution. Cisco is one of the few, and so I expect them to still dominate in large enterprise. And
Yeah.
but where the mid market's been the one adopting cloud pretty rapidly. So, but I do expect Cisco to help the big install base move to the cloud in a way that's not disruptive. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, what I see is that, the shift that we've been seeing, that we're seeing now from Cisco, is the shift that they've needed to do for some time. And the company is now leaning into instead of being a house of brands, which is confusing,
Mhm.
Cisco's focused on being a branded house. And I think that simplifying things for customers, for partners, for sales teams is a significant move. I think this is a big year ahead. You and I've talked about this before. I think it's a prove it year, right? The platform
Yep.
has been rebuilt. AI has integrated throughout. The platform vision has been clearly articulated. The CCAS, the CCAS strategy has been set. Can Cisco make this platform story work? Can Cisco win in CCAS? And I think that, we'll see, in the next year, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. The platform strategy is in place. They have G2 as a single product owner in place. Splunk integration is done, right? And now it's time to be able to build on top of that. So,
Yeah.
I think this is where they, they need to start putting the numbers up, and
Yeah.
and that's the best um, uh, the best proof point we need to know that the strategy is working.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
To our viewers and listening audience, this is Shely Kramer from Kramer& Company Research. Thank you so much for joining us today for our coverage of enterprise and emerging tech news. And if you've not yet hit that subscribe button, we'd love for you to do so. And we'll see you back here next time.